All right, we didn't quite finish talking about Wordsworth before I ran out of the 15-minute restriction that I have on creating videos. Uh, so here are Wordsworth's contributions. One of his major contributions was the poem Daffodils, which is a poem that we're going to look at in a minute. Wordsworth was going on a walk with his sister Dorothy in April of 1802 when he was inspired to write this particular poem. It tells about how Wordsworth feels one with his surroundings and attributes his own feelings to the nature around him. He later attaches himself or continually revisits the memory of this walk and this attachment to nature using his imagination, which is part of the poem, the last stanza of the poem. Part of his new style of poetry was creating metaphors between the human mind and nature. And in fact, Daffodils kind of talks about the connecting point, the conjoining of nature to the mind, how both of them are designed to have a way in which to cultivate the sublime in life. Uh, He gave the idea of writers to seek to unite tranquility of nature and the inner emotional world of men. This was pretty important in a tumultuous time in which there was rapid change taking place in industrial revolution, urbanization, uh, lots of stress, lots of anxiety. And so having a place to retreat into the inner life and the inner thoughts and to foster and cultivate a healthy emotional life by exploring and looking into nature, by recalling the solitude and the beauty of getting out of the city and going to the countryside was valuable and important. Wordsworth thought that the world was too fast paced and noisy, and so he wanted to create opportunities for people to get away from that noise and from that rapid pace, and by reflecting on poetry and by having nature experiences they could get away from all of that hustle and bustle. He also wanted to create poetry that reunited readers with true emotions and feelings. So this is I wandered lonely as a cloud, which we commonly refer to this as daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd of host of dancing daffodils. Along the lake beneath the trees, 10,000 dancing in the breeze. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a laughing company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the shew to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So in this poem, he is reflecting on a past experience of his walk with Dorothy, seeing the daffodils dancing in the breeze. And as he reaches into his inner life, as he seeks bliss and solitude, he recalls that precious memory that he had. This is the kind of way in which he wanted to foster uh, peace and harmony within his own emotional life and for others as well. All right, so here are the two reflection questions that you can look at for romanticism. Uh, I would encourage you to pause the video at this point and go and sit down and write those reflection responses immediately. And that way all of this content is kind of fresh for you. Now let's go on to our next 19th century ideology and talk about socialism. In order to talk about socialism, we first have to recall one of the other ideologies that we covered last time we met, and that was liberalism. Liberalism was a ideology that fostered ideas and values like individualism inherited rights, equality for law, economic freedom, the sanctity of private property, talent, ambition, and material success. When you think about like one group of people that represent liberalism, it's the bourgeoisie. And during this period of the Industrial Revolution, the bourgeoisie had grown such a vast amount of hegemony within society. Liberalism maximizes the personal autonomy and limiting power of the state to the basic needs of national defense. Law enforcement were, for liberals, key ingredients to personal and corporate happiness. So this is an ideology that led to nationalism and a nationalistic viewpoint. Having the values of individualism, inherited rights, equality for law and freedom, and the value of private property fostered a certain political, capitalistic, economic mindset within people. People would strive to get property. People would strive to get goods. People would strive to have their own rights and their own laws. Socialism as an ideology reacted to all of the talent and ambition and material success that liberalism cultivated. So let's talk about socialism. Socialism is a movement that represents the proletariat. Who is the proletariat? The proletariat are the working class factory workers that are working for the middle class bourgeoisie. Socialists' greatest proponent, Karl Marx, believed that the proletariat was going to overturn the bourgeoisie and become the new nucleus of socio-political power through this ideology as it became pervasive across the world. And he felt that socialism was going to be the next global movement that was going to occur. Socialism believed in an egalitarian society in which there isn't the privilege and there isn't the lower class, but there is everybody at one scale. There's a solidarity between people. There is this cooperative aspect to human nature. There's a very positive view of human capability when people are put in cooperation with one another. And socialism promoted the idea of abolishing private property. I think if you recall, last time I might have mentioned something about how a true socialist is somebody who is always going to live in an apartment. They aren't going to be a homeowner. They aren't going to buy a piece of property because they don't believe in private property. And socialists view the corporate over the individual. Everybody works to further the corporate life. In understanding who the proletariat is, this quote from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' classic, The Communist Manifesto, is extremely helpful. It's right below where it says proletariat on the display. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeoisie class and of the bourgeoisie state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all, by the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. That is the picture of the proletariat, and Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wants to free all of these factory workers from that enslavement. So who is Karl Marx? Karl Marx lived from 1818 to 1883. In 1841, he received his PhD in philosophy at the University of Jena. In August of 1844, he meets Friedrich Engels in a cafe, and they become really close friends. In 1848, the two of them published together The Communist Manifesto, which was a work that spread rapidly throughout Europe. In the 1860s, he publishes his multi-volume work, The Das Kapital. His contributions, he contributed the idea of an egalitarian society, and he wished to enable the proletariat to rise and abolish the class system, particularly the old aristocracy and the emerging bourgeoisie. Marxism is the idea that human societies develop from class struggle. One of the things that a Marxist history talks about or portrays is the fact that throughout history there has always been a class struggle, whether it was between the Greco-Roman patricians and the slaves, or if it was from the feudal lords and the serfs in the medieval period, or in the emerging period that they lived in that day, the middle class business factory manager and the proletariat factory worker. There are classes that exist, and one class is always going to struggle against the other until the abolition of class, which was the goal of socialism. So the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles, as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels said in page 74 of the Communist Manifesto. This is a very long clip of the Communist Manifesto. It picks up a lot of the language and ideology that I've already talked about, so I'm not going to go into depth on it. I would encourage you to spend some time reading this and reflecting on it yourself. Here are the two questions to consider or think about that have to do with socialism. I would encourage you at this point to stop and reflect on these two questions and fill out a reflection response to them and then submit that online to me. So this ends our lectures on Romanticism and socialism. I would encourage you to stay tuned to Moodle to see when I post the video on Kuyperianism. I hope you are currently writing your papers for Kuyper or your reflection for Kuyper, and I look forward to seeing that from you soon. Have a great rest of your week.